Okay, I think let's begin. Hi everyone, my name is Pragya. I am part of the communications team at Dakshin. Um, and welcome to the session on people's knowledge and biodiversity. Just before beginning, a couple of lines about Dakshin. Dakshin Foundation is a marine conservation organization which works on informing and advocating conservation and natural resource governance, while also supporting sustainable livelihoods, social development, and environmental justice. We work across the Indian coast and also in the island spaces of Andaman and Nicobar and Lakshadweep. And today we are here to mark the occasion of International Day for Biodiversity, which was on the 22nd. And we will be having a conversation on various aspects related to like local ecological knowledge, its legal recognition, governance of local ecological knowledge, and ecological data. So I will, today we have Shyama Kuriakose, Vineetha Venugopal, and Alphonsa Jojan, and I will let them introduce themselves. Before I pass on the mic to Alphonsa, I would like to tell you that during the session, feel free to switch on your videos and raise your hands if you have any questions. And you can also alternatively message on the chat box. We will also have some time dedicated for question and answers towards the end of the session. So you can also ask your questions or give your comments then. But yeah, feel free to do either of these. Okay, over to Alfonsa.
Thank you, Pragya. Thank you for inviting us for this conversation. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. So as we celebrate the International Day for Biological Diversity, we as people working on biodiversity law, environmental law, commons, and knowledge relating to traditional ecology, what we really want to bring forward and highlight is the importance and relevance of people's knowledge on biodiversity. This is especially because many times in the entire biological diversity discussion, which may be relating to conservation, governance, etc., people's knowledge and traditional local ecological knowledge is not really given due importance. So we are taking this opportunity to highlight the relevance, the challenges that are there on protecting and promoting local ecological knowledge. To set the context, as we know, there are a lot of communities who directly depend on ecosystems around them, the environmental around them, and they have over the years built extensive knowledge relating to the local biodiversity, local knowledge. This is passed on from elders and older generations. And it's not just it's not just a static knowledge, but it is also something that is enriched by everyday experiences, enriched by sharing of the knowledge of the ecosystems around them, by self-reflection, by discussion and deliberation amongst the community members, with other community members. So we really want to highlight that the traditional ecological knowledge, we want to start this conversation by really discussing whether there is due recognition of the traditional ecological knowledge, which is quite important for the for the local communities, for their livelihood, for their nutrition, for their prosperity, development, and whether the government is actually recognizing this. We also want to discuss how is the government, research, and other institutions recognizing this knowledge system, whether there is appropriate use of this knowledge system. We also want to know how or discuss whether there is due recognition by the industry which is using the knowledge system. So just to start the conversation, maybe like we would really want to discuss whether there is actually like a difference between Western science and traditional ecological knowledge, and whether we have recognized or given recognition to local ecological knowledge as we, give recognition to Western science in various aspects of biodiversity, be it conservation, be it governance, etc. So, Vineetha, would you like to kind of, throw light to the various aspects of, the difference, if there is difference between Western science and local ecological knowledge?
Yeah. First of all, to begin with, I would prefer the term local ecological knowledge rather than traditional knowledge, because as Alphonsa pointed out, it is continuously changing and evolving. People are learning new things. They are adapting to new technologies and integrating this knowledge. And then, so there is this false dichotomy between Western science and local ecological knowledge that keeps Western science on a pedestal. A lot of time to the disadvantage of science, of knowledge production, to the livelihood of people. I mean, if you look at the various institutions governing natural resources, for example, a lot of the people who are trained in Western science, they would think that, oh, we know much better than the local community. And they may not be, they are often not receptive for the knowledge of towards the knowledge of the local community, be they fishers, or be they Adivasis, or be they farmers. However, if we look at it, they both have more similarities. One of the arguments, both are sort of in a way peer-reviewed because community collectively discuss it, and both are systematically done because community like seasonally goes and does the data collection. Oh, for example, okay, there is fish decline this year. Okay, less trees are blossoming. So, and then it is also passed, recorded. Local ecological knowledge is sometimes passed orally. The other one is more formally documented. So there are actually more similarities than differences, and our inability to, the collective inability to recognize it has often led to not the best outcomes for conservation or for resource management. One of the very classical examples was like how when British came to India, they came with all these ideas of, scientific management that was aimed at getting maximum productivity for, say, maximum timber resources for construction of railways and all from the forest. So they couldn't understand the controlled fire process that indigenous communities used to do. Controlled fire actually adds to soil fertility. It actually helps prevent large wildfire outbreaks. It's only much later that they recognize. So knowledge, it matters. Knowledge, there is this knowledge power complex. It matters a lot what you are saying. Who is saying what, just as well as what you are saying. And to come to the question, there is an increased attention given to local ecological knowledge these days. Everybody is saying, okay, local ecological knowledge, we should incorporate, it should form the basis of governance. And then, I mean, like, there are lots of questions surrounding it. For example, what is the legal status? Alphonsa or Shyama, if you, either of you could, I mean, elaborate a bit on the legal status and legal recognition. Yeah.
Alphonsa, do you want to get that?
Yeah. With respect to legal recognition, I mean, it's a positive, as Vineetha pointed out. Recently or lately, there is a recognition from the government side for the local ecological knowledge. But I'm quite, doubtful about the real meaning of that legal recognition, because I mean, I want to highlight a couple of legislations here. One is the Biological Diversity Act, which is mainly the Indian response to the International Convention on Biological Diversity. And in the Biological Diversity Act, there is a section called the section 36, subclause 5, which says that the central government shall endeavor to respect and protect knowledge of local people relating to biodiversity. So there is a very clear legal provision, which asks the central government, which actually mandates the central government to create legislation or create measures for protection of the knowledge of local people. But so far, under the Biological Diversity Act, the central government has not acted upon this. But so as a direct, even so, which basically means that yes, there is a legal recognition of this knowledge, but has the central government done anything for really protecting the knowledge? Under that section, there is no legal protection at all, which is basically given to the local communities. But if you look at, one can really extrapolate that commitment if one wants, just for the sake of the argument. And one can look at the provisions for People's Biodiversity Register, which is basically a register that has to be compiled by the local biodiversity management committees, which is a representative community of various people who are directly depending on the ecosystem, such as the, in different states, it's the state legislation has a mandate on who will represent the committee, but it can include people from the agriculture community, people that is the farmers, the fishing community, forest dwellers, etc. So if one kind of really go through this PBR process, we know that it's actually just another way of documenting the local biodiversity for the sake of for the sake of that particular provision. What is the meaning of the People's Biodiversity Register? What is the use of that People's Biodiversity Register? It's really not discussed. It's just to mainly comply with the legal provision this particular process is carrying out. Shyama, would you like to add on to it?
Yeah. So as Alphonsa was saying that, People's Biodiversity Register is very well recognized under the law, and they're supposed to create it. But what is done with this register once it's prepared? What is its protection status? Who can access it? And what is the safeguard against anybody coming and taking that, misappropriating the information within this register? Also, what is the nature of data that's being recorded in this? Does it include just the ecological data? Does it include traditional folklore, stories, recipes? So the of course, like I know that the National Biodiversity Authority has tried to come up with some sort of guidelines on what goes into these people's biodiversity register. But I have a feeling that a lot is getting missed out, and a lot of people don't really know what is to be done once this register is made. And then, like you and me, we may not even know that in our panchayats, in our municipalities, there is a provision to actually prepare these registers. How involved are we in this process? So this itself is like, so the local biodiversity that you see around you, if you would want to record it, or if there is harm to it, you feel that you need to record that stuff. Do you know who's your biodiversity management committee member to go and actually say that, look, I want to record this information? That's one part of it. The other part of it is this access part. This access thing is now very important to understand. The thing is that this is stuff that's being created out of public funds. There are funds being generated, there are state grants, there are central grants, which help in the creation of these registers. So right now what we understand is that it's locked up. It's under lock and key. No normal citizen like you and I can go and access it to see what does this register include. But the whole point of, so I'm a proponent of open access with safeguards. So when we say that, like, as a citizen, I would like to access that. And as a local entrepreneur or a local innovator, or even a local, a person who holds local traditional knowledge, if I want to access that, what are the ways? That is not clear. And this is being created out of public funds. And so the fact that it's still under lock and key, I add to this, People's Biodiversity Register is one kind of thing. There was another initiative a while earlier on Traditional Knowledge Digital Library. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. Even that was created out of public funds, but only patent offices across the world could access it, and not a common Indian citizen. It's not meant for a normal person to look at. So, and the irony is that all of this knowledge is traditional knowledge, which is in the public domain in the sense of the word. These are things that are already known. The use of turmeric, the use of neem, or any other such medicinal plants or any such traditional recipes is already in the public domain, but yet it's being kept under lock and key by the government. So this is like the irony that, on one hand, you're saying that traditional knowledge is, it belongs to all of us, but very few of us can actually access it. So that is a dichotomy that I am grappling with right now. Vineetha?
And there is this question of, if it is people's diversity, which it is indeed, what are the other ways that we can use it? All of us, especially coastal states, are grappling with the threat of climate change. And so, we can't pretend as if the common people don't have a role in it. Shouldn't be a centralized response from the state or even the central government. It has to be decentralized, be it disaster management, ideally disaster prevention or natural resource governance. So when it comes to natural resource governance, assuming that citizens like us, we have to, not assumption, of course, we should play a role for our own survival and the survival of the future generations. As Shyama was saying, what good is this keeping it under lock and key? How is it going to help us? And then there would be again this question, what will a common citizen know about? How can they support? What value is their knowledge? But in that case, in how many panchayats in here, in all over India, in how many blocks are the so-called formal scientists or the governments undertaking proper collection of data about the, are they doing flood mapping? Are they looking at the rainfall? If not, why are they not turning to people? And local ecological knowledge has historically played a role in governing the commons and natural conservation. There are many examples throughout history, starting with some famous cases of rat infestation, where finally the British took the helps of the tribal communities in the northeast region after they thoroughly failed to contain it. And then this local ecological knowledge has led to inventions in the modern, what they call as Western science, leading to even products that we use in medicine and modern medicine. And then also there are other aspects to the local ecological knowledge where that it directly types of the common governance. For example, Bhavin, who has studied extensively on coram fisheries on coromandel coast, made this observation that when the local institutions, local fisheries, traditional institutions, they governed, when they were allowing, say, new nets, they looked into 3 points: whether it is harming the collective way of life, whether it is harming to the fish stock, and whether it is harming the larger ecosystem. So all of this so people are, and even in Chilka Lake in Odisha, at one time it used to be governed by the fishing communities living nearby, with the different groups fishing in different areas, different species in different seasons. And once the local communities lost control over this governance due to the boom in global demand for prawn, government opened it up, all types of people came, just invested, it became open access. Tragedy of commons, as you know, is a misnomer. It is tragedy of the open access. So coming back to the question, how do we proceed from, where do we take it forward from creating this people's biodiversity register? It's an open discussion we can all have, though as Alphonsa pointed out, how many of us are aware that in our blogs or in Panchayat there are this data collected? How many of us are collecting it due to climate change and disaster preparedness? Or there are, even if you are not a coastal state and not under direct threat, there are threats related to water and earth and other, other challenges, water crisis and everything. So how many of us are looking into that, how it is being used and everything? I think that's an open, how local ecological knowledge and people's biodiversity, how it can be used to govern commons, natural resources and conservation, and how people can effectively participate in it. I think that's a question that we can throw open and discuss.
Yeah, so I mean, if anyone wants to, join the conversation, you can unmute yourself or raise your hand. Meantime, maybe I would also like to add that, like just how Shyama pointed out, there is an instance of this marine biodiversity register that was developed. This is just one thing that came to my mind. So the marine biodiversity register that was developed in the state of Kerala, in the Trivandrum coast. So the people, it was developed with the participation of the people, but like one of the people who was involved in the preparation of the marine biodiversity register was telling that once the register became, it was recorded, it was taken away from the people, it was kept in the library. Of course, you can see that in the library of the Kerala State Biodiversity Board, but the final product was never taken back to the community. It was never given to the community. There was no public, at least, there was no public presentation of what is there, public display of what is there in the register. So it's really important that we ask the question, like, who is this public register, People's Biodiversity Register created for? And I also want to really, highlight the fact that as we have these state of environment reports, national state of environmental reports in the at the national level, this People's Biodiversity Register can be seen as like a local environment review, right? Like, a state of local environment. So nothing is actually like, no one, especially the government, is not really, it basically means that the government do not have a vision for this People's Biodiversity Register. And maybe, as Vineetha pointed out, we should as citizens get involved more and claim this space, this this register and, like contribute it to the conservation and development of our area, and use up funds that basically is our own money for our own benefit. So does anyone want to kind of like, share your idea about how to involve ourselves in this kind of, uh, recording or documenting or using the people's ecological knowledge?
Um, Thank you, Alphonsa. I was just wondering, like it's like what you guys are also mentioning, how it's not very clear as to how we can access these documents. But say, like you mentioned how it was kept in the library, the Biodiversity Register made in Trivandrum. So, like, are there like basically, even if we have to ask questions about these registers, where can we begin asking these questions? Like, who do I go to and ask about, whether, like my location or my region has a people's biodiversity register? Do we have clarity on that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like, so the registers are under the custody of the Biodiversity Management Committee, which is the committee that is nominated by the local bodies. So it's your panchayat or the municipality or the corporation. So if you go to the panchayat or municipality or the corporation, whichever area that you belong, you can ask them about the People's Biodiversity Register. So maybe like that's one of the first steps that we can take. And yeah, I mean, in Kerala, there is a system that the state biodiversity boards have a library of all the registers that they have created, and there's also the entire registers are being digitalized. So how do you access the digital registers? I am not very sure. Yeah, Shyama, do you want to?
Yeah, no, there isn't any guidance on how you can access it, because right now I think they're focusing on creating these registers to begin with. And Kerala is probably one of those few states that have actually taken the leap, and they've gone ahead and they've done a lot of work. I think at this point, they're just focusing on the registering part, and how to use it and all those other issues that I mentioned is yet to be figured out. But I suppose that if we go to the State Biodiversity Board website and just use the contact page and ask them questions, that I think will certainly bear some results. The second thing would be, and I believe that they will be responsive, because I know that biodiversity boards, at least in the South Indian states, are quite proactive. So, but I shouldn't say South and North. I'm assuming that any state with a lot of biodiversity is doing its bit. I know that Uttarakhand, Maharashtra, these are two states that are also doing a lot of work on the biodiversity front. So I think it's just a matter of going to their website and connecting with them and see what's going on. Otherwise, there's always RTI to know, oh, what have you done with this information? So right now, yeah, it's all up in the air as to what options you can use. I'd also like to kind of, add in here about, like, there are some challenges also with open access. This data that's collected, how do you save it? How do you curate it? What servers are they kept in? Because now everything is digital. Most things are digital. The People's Biodiversity Register is going to be digital. So once you've recorded it, how do you take care of this data? How do you ensure that there are no intellectual property right violations? For instance, if traditional knowledge is what you have recorded, did you take the free, prior and informed consent of the community whose information you have recorded? You know, these are also questions that then keep coming up. And later when you end up using that information, either in an article or a paper that you write, or some product has been developed, it's at that point that, you know, this conflict arises, that, you know, oh, our information was used and you have not taken our permission. So what are these safeguards really taken care of when People's Biodiversity Register is being recorded? The element of consent. And then suppose traditional knowledge is belonging to somebody, I mean, you don't know who it belongs to. It's unidentifiable. For instance, there's a lot of information out there that has been passed down from generation to generation. Can we really attribute that to a community or an individual? It's very difficult. So in cases of that information, how do you attribute that person? That is also another challenge that needs to then get addressed. And the biggest issue, of course, is if this data is available in the public domain, what prevents anyone from misusing it for whatever purposes? You know, maybe it's for commercial, and a lot of that happens too. There's a lot of I was reading recently about how tattoos of tribal symbols are being misappropriated without, like, people are taking it, and there are community members who are getting affected by that. They're offended by that because these symbols mean something to that community. But when you're taking that symbol and then just, you know, just for style, for, like, you know, to look cool, I'm not against people getting tattoos. I'm just saying that, you know, be very careful when you when you're using traditional or tribal symbols. So there's a lot of misappropriation that's going on in any case with regard to cultural symbols. And then when it comes to plants or medicinal knowledge or ecological knowledge, the way birds cry when a disaster is about to come, or the way plants behave when something is about to happen, these are all things that are of not just, it's got a moral value with the community. So it's not just about the money, or it's not just about copyright. It's just that they also have a moral value over it. So how you use it, these are also things that as an individual, I think when I read about these tribal symbols, I really thought about it, because I would not think for a second before buying some art, on like Wurli art, for instance. It's a tribal art form, or things that, you know, Northeast, there are a lot of states that have things that they do, which is unique to them. And I usually wouldn't think that, oh, this is their cultural. I'm like, oh, it's available in a curio store, I'll just buy it. But as an individual, as a citizen, as a responsible citizen who wants to conserve and this kind of knowledge, I would say that we have to ensure whether the people behind it are getting attributed and whether the people behind it are getting compensated. So I think this is an added element to the ecological knowledge. But I think these stories, these symbols all have a value to ecology as well. So which is why I thought it's important to bring it up.
I just want to add to what Shyama said, very valuable points, because she pointed out some of these knowledge are considered sacred by the community. And also when we represent them without giving them the adequate context, they get misrepresented. And also we just like to think of their knowledge as traditional, and are we really giving them opportunity to engage in research, getting into collaboration, crediting them? And also, yeah, there is another question that say we feel we are being very cool by wearing, like something of indigenous art or something. But at the same time, say if we are opposing, say, community forest right acts or PESA, then say we are just or even say we are just focusing on documenting these knowledge, but we are not actively doing a bit towards working on community forest rights or PESA or even fishers rights, then we are probably doing them an injustice, because they have been the custodians of this knowledge. And while we are reaping the benefits of them, we have also the duty to give it back, to I mean, also for our own sake, our own survival and for the planet to conserve it further. And we can't conserve this knowledge without its guardians. So we have that duty to legally and every manner possible, I mean, like stand with them in their fight. And I was also wondering, Shyama, as a follow-up to the question, do you think, I mean, I don't know much about this, that is why this question, geographic indication, GI tags, do you think, I mean, because you said it is difficult to identify whom this knowledge belongs to. So do you think GI tags would be helpful in that regard? I mean, how does it work?
Yeah, so to explain to the audience, geographical indications is a kind of intellectual property right that can be claimed by a community belonging to a geographical area, and the product that comes off of it can only be produced by that community from that area. So example being Darjeeling tea, right? So there are a lot of people out there who might exhibit products called Darjeeling tea, but it may not be from Darjeeling. You may get that in Chennai, right? But that or you may get it in some other place, but without it having been ever seen, like produced in Darjeeling. So this is what geographical indication means, that once you get the tag of geographical indication, it helps. Now, thing is, yes, it does help in this context where, you know, a community that is traditionally being developing a product for or not developing, rather producing a thing for a while, it becomes easy to do that. The problem with that and what we are speaking of, ecological knowledge, is GI supports products and knowledge of that product, right? But if there is no product, see, GI is meant for commercial appropriation as well, right? Like, so basically that community will get the proceeds or benefits of that thing. So if there is no product and if it's just knowledge, like my grandmother's fish curry recipe, right? Like, and it's just a recipe in my head and it's not a product. And you can come here and have my grandmother's recipe. I can make it for you, but are you commercializing it? So GI comes in when you're wanting to commercialize something and want to make sure that nobody else appropriates of it. So it helps when there is a commercial element involved, but not when there is nothing commercial there, because intellectual property at the end of the day is about the profits that you make. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also to add on to the entire, the process of preparing a people's biodiversity register, right? So, like how you pointed out, Shyama, like whether there is free informed consent of the communities that is, going into the process. Whether, I mean, what is the role of the communities in preparing these registers? I was once, I mean, when I was like working on a handbook that was on coastal and marine biodiversity register, one of the officials was telling me that in the people's biodiversity register, the people component of it is not there. It's just a biodiversity register. Right? The whole point of the People's Biodiversity Register is that it is people's knowledge, right? But when you look at the way in which the process of preparing these registers, it's like there are certain questions, certain committees or groups are formed, and they are asked to go to different households and basically do a survey and ask, okay, do you know, like, what are the bioresources that you find in this area, right? Then there are certain columns that, they have to, these people who are going and doing the survey have to do by asking the people. So it's a very, like, it's like how you do a population census, right? Like it's in that format. So we have not, I don't think we have thought enough about this process of preparing people's biodiversity register. So only when we really basically give adequate importance for the process, then the questions of free informed consent of the communities can be basically, effectively responded, right? Like, and when you look at the, like, if you look at the Biodiversity Act also nowadays, uh, even though the people like even though there is a commercial use to the traditional knowledge, all the bioresources that are collected from a particular jurisdiction, no government body has the responsibility to identify the holders of the knowledge. Well and good if the users are themselves, telling that, okay, we have used the knowledge of this community. We are using the bioresources from this particular area. It's great if someone is mentioning that. If no one is mentioning that, it's just like, the applications for bioprospecting just goes through. No one. That's why we don't have any benefit sharing with unidentified communities, even though we have People's Biodiversity Register. So what is the whole point of, making all these People's Biodiversity Register? Whole point of like all these applications that are going to the National Biodiversity Authority and the State Biodiversity Board, the entire process, I think a lot of democratization is required to be, attached to this process. Yeah.
So can I add in here with this example that it seemed like a nice example to me of how data should be collected. And this is basically, I had done a paper on ecological data from around the world. So I was looking at examples. And so this is from the Oceania region. So it comprises of countries like Australia, Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. Okay, so these are areas surrounding the Ring of Fire. And so they always get a lot of disasters. There'll be typhoons and volcanoes and earthquakes. So it's a very ecologically fragile area, but also very ecologically rich. And so the indigenous communities out there, with their government support, came together, all of them together, and created a database on historic observations of plant and animal behavior when any extreme climate event strikes, or any other physical or biological factors that come into play when a disaster is about to strike. This is based on their historical observations. And when they did this, it followed the strictest data collection ethics, meaning that their free, prior, and informed consent was taken. The way the data was standardized, it was curated, the place in which it is kept, to ensure that it remains sustainable to maintain this database. It's not enough that you've just collected it. What happens to this after a while when the funds run out? Even that becomes a question. So, and the most important thing was cultural sensitivities were maintained. So if there is any information on sacred rituals or sacred places in that region, that was kept out. So basically all of that was taken care of, and it was not a random survey like Alphonsa was mentioning for where you go house to house and collect data. That wasn't the case here. So this is touted as a good case study example of how traditional ecological data can be collected, ensured that there is people's participation, it is democratized, and all sensitivities have been kept in check. So I just thought, I should throw it out there. I can share the paper in which I came across it, but it'll be an interesting thing to read.
Should we pause here and ask if anybody has any questions? So if you have any questions, you can raise your hands, not just questions, even comments. If there's something you would want to say, you can raise your hands, or you can also type in the chat box. Yeah. Shyama, there is a request for you to share the paper. It's by Vineetha.
Yes. Yes, I will do that.
I was wondering if there are any examples of GI that you can give us from, say, marine and coastal spaces is something that can is there anything that comes to your mind?
The Aranmula Kannadi, that is from Alapi side. It's
Okay.
not based out of marine resources, but it's done by people in the coast, a specific community. So they have a GI. But yes, it's not based out of marine resources. We might have to just look into, there is a GI registry, Geographical Indications Registry of the Government of India. So if you go there, we can check what all is having a GI. For instance, top of my head, I can think of the Kanchipuram saris, the Tirupati laddus, I think Rasgulla from Odisha, so some of these examples. Yes, Halim from Hyderabad, and then Hyderabadi biryani. These things have GI, the geographical indication. So you'll be surprised to see the kind of things that have GI. So it'll be worthwhile to just check that thing to see. And it might be beneficial to communities in that area if you check it.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, we've all consumed these things, we've all heard about these things, but, we don't know about this concept of
Toda
GI.
embroidery also is GI tagged from Uti, the Toda tribe.
Yes. That's also there. It's a quite a interesting and large list of GI items, and that will surprise you. So
there's
it'll be
a small community in Kerala that makes pulpaya, which is basically mats from grass. Killimangalam pulpaya, that is also GI tagged.
Oh, nice. Any other GIs that people can think of? I know the Darjeeling tea, but see, these are all like mainstream.
Internationally, I mean, what we call champagne is again a GI tag.
Champagne. Champagne can only be made in Champagne.
From that region,
France.
Made from grapes from the Champagne region.
Yes, no one else. And Scotch whiskey, people who drink. You cannot call it Scotch whiskey if it's not from Scotland.
That region,
From that region of Scotland. So check out the register. Like Scotch and Champagne are of course international GIs, but for Indian GIs, we can just check the Indian Registry of Geographical Indication.
One doubt though, what happens when an artisan from say Alapura, migrates to say England and decides to create the
this is the gap in the law. This is the gap in the law. The law has not addressed issues like this, that when a community migrates or intermarries, another community member, then does that go to that community also, or does it stay within this community? These are questions that law has not answered.
And I was also very keen on following up what Alphonsa was saying about how we needed to democratize the process of people's biodiversity register. Because I remember when Gadgil committee report was being widely discussed in Kerala, of course, it has a lot of defects. But one good thing that the report had was it tried to bring ecological governance into the central space where Grama Panchayats could decide what they want, how affected Grama Panchayat, biologically sensitive Grama Panchayat, to decide the way they wanted what development and activities should take place in their area, how it should be categorized and everything. Unfortunately, that part was totally covered up in the large misinformation campaign against the report. But we were also saying the same thing, how the certain communities were able to, it was a very hyper-local process because they could decide what is sacred for them and all. So maybe we needed to also, as Alphonsa was saying, looking at the whole process of these people's biodiversity register and see how much more flexibility we can bring into, so that it becomes more Indian, so that the Indian system becomes more comparable with the best practices out there. Like it doesn't, as you pointed it, so that it doesn't get reduced to just, data collection, but a space where, and of course, I'm not saying that local self-governments can always be trusted to do the right thing, especially when it comes to natural resource dependent marginalized communities. Local self-governments suffer from elite capture, often by the upper caste community. But what are the ways that, we could make this system more democratic? That is something we can think about.
Good evening, everyone. I actually have a doubt. Uh, Ma'am, you were referring to the term ecologically fragile. I wanted to know, apart from the parameters like a region prone to destruction and various calamities, are there any other parameters which govern a region to become an ecologically fragile region over time, or is it only specific over a years, it's or is it determined by any other factors?
Is the question directed at me?
No, Shyama.
No. Yeah, I brought that term up. So thing is, ecologically fragile is something that only has a dictionary meaning. So you go for a dictionary meaning, it is what that says. Otherwise, in our, in like the only law I know in Kerala, we have the Ecologically Fragile Land Act. And that defines, that has a very wide definition of what is an ecologically fragile land. So you might have to, for a more global understanding, you might have to refer to the dictionary meaning of the term. And for a very local context, so for the ecologically fragile term, there is only one law that I know of in Kerala. And then as Vineetha mentions, there is also something called ecologically sensitive areas, ESAs, or ecologically sensitive zones, ESZs and ESAs. So there are a lot of ways to define fragility. So sensitivity comes in. The fact that it's, so eco-sensitive zones are around protected areas, like, national parks and sanctuaries. This is to leave a buffer between the sanctuary or national park and urban habitations. So that is one kind of eco-sensitive zone or ecologically fragile land. But then there is also lands, areas which have, like, for instance, Dehradun is considered, has been demarcated, notified as an eco-sensitive area, meaning it's very fragile. You need to take special care, special aspects of that landscape before you protect it. So that is why you might have to go for different interpretations of the term sensitive and fragile before making a determination. Yes, the Ecologically Fragile Act was very draconian. That's right, Vineetha. There's a case,
Thank you.
court case going on in Supreme Court challenging the constitutional validity of this law.
Do you want to elaborate on why is it draconian?
So it's slightly off topic, but I mean, if you want to get into it, I can get into it. So basically, Ecological Fragile Act is considered to be a little draconian because it was a continuation of the process of taking back all the lands that were there with the zamindars, or large landowners had these lands back in the 50s and 60s. So this process was ongoing. So there was a Land Reforms Act where a lot of this land was taken back. So people who had 60, 70, 100, 200, 2000 acres were suddenly left with 100 acres, 200 acres. Purpose of the government was food security and also to provide land to the landless. This was the initial objective with which that was started. Now, this was challenged a lot by a lot of these landlords, saying that this is draconian and that please don't do it. We have cultivation ongoing. So a lot of agricultural lands got taken in under this. And then many years passed. A lot of these landowners got back their lands because they said that this agriculture, they could prove it in a court of law that we have agriculture ongoing. These are not fallow lands. And this is important for our livelihood. This was proven and they got their lands back. And then the government decided to come up with an Ecologically Fragile Land Act, under which many of these lands got retaken. So basically, it's like a battle that has been going on since the 1950s on the guise that this land will be given to landless. But unfortunately, this land is now all with the forest department, and nothing, not a single thing has been given either to landless or back to the landowners. This is why I call it draconian.
Yeah, I remember meeting a farmer. I mean, it's also off topic, but who was, I mean, like who had his agriculture land taken away in the name of ecological fragile land.
Yeah.
And it was not even, it didn't even belong to the initial categorization of ecological fragile land. So the officials in the revenue department, they did some corruption. They colluded with some other people and had his land taken away instead of some other, I mean, actually landlord's land. And this person, I mean, it was really difficult. He was, so, I mean, this was one of the demands I remember at that time. So all of these actions by the, apparently by the, well, people think of all of it as created a resentment against environmental conservation.
Exactly.
In the minds of the local communities.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you also add in human wildlife conflict, it happens due to fragmentation. But I mean, all of this, like we also have to think from the people side. Yeah.
People's side also. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay.
Pragya, I've shared the link for the
Yeah.
GI registry as well as the article if people want
Thank
to
you. There is a question.
I don't think there's a law that prevents you from planting unless it is a genetically modified organism. And so there are rules for field testing of such species. But otherwise, for exotics, I don't think that there is any law. Unless Alphonsa, Vineetha, if you know of anything. I'm not aware.
I don't know of any law, but I believe he has brought up a very important point because there is now a lot of funding. I mean, being in the NGO sector, you are aware where funds goes to ecological restoration and tree planting and everything. And so there is a lot of mindless tree planting going on. This understanding that any sort of tree planting anywhere is good. Imagine the, I mean, so what happens is that local gene pools are getting distorted. So essentially, I mean, even the mangroves, say you want to plant mangroves, you shouldn't be planting the same mangroves all over. You should be finding out what in that particular cost, what was the local biodiversity and produce it in the, and also you should look into how you should be expanding, I mean, preserving that biodiversity of the diversity of the local gene pool instead of just homogenizing it. So there is a, I mean, unfortunately, there is this entire narrative around planting trees everywhere, even on, you know, sometimes on wetlands and sometimes on grasslands are good. And he has brought up a very important point. So just wanted to highlight it because it's after all International Biodiversity Day. And but Alphonsa, if you know anything, please feel free to add.
I also believe there's no specific law which basically, you know, enables someone to file a case like that. But like, I think that also brings to, you know, our attention the need for public participation and, you know, public scrutiny over what is being planted. So, I mean, I don't know if like this is planted in public land or even like forest area and and like, I mean, for instance, like how do we have more native plants in our forest, right? Like, I mean, do people have a say in that, or is it all left to the forest department? So and not just a forest but also like say in a local body, how do we say we, I mean, how do we involve people in basically all these tree planting activities? So yeah, I mean, it's a good question to ponder.
Yeah.
And you know,
So I can tell you in certainty that for invasive species we have policies. I don't know how much these policies are being implemented, but there are, like lantana, for instance, is considered as an invasive. So the forest departments across the country are doing as per a policy. So you have that, but I don't think you can, everything is about extraction. No one has actually thought about invasive or exotic. Like, you know, what happens if you do something to the land? It's more about taking away from the land. Even the Biodiversity Act is about extraction and not about, like, it should be considered a crime if you're introducing something that's very alien to that landscape. I would think so. But yeah, I think it's another step. First, I think people should know what's around them to begin with before thinking as to what is exotic and what is native. So, yeah.
I think the conversation comes a full circle there, where, when people need to know what is around them, and if people had access to, people's biodiversity registers, and if they, were maintained and created in a democratic manner, then people would get to know, like, what is around them. Does this answer your question, Ram Prasad? Is there anything you would want to ask as a follow-up?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. My doubt was solved. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. There's no answer. There's no answer to your question, but yeah, it's something for us to think of for the future.
Are there any more questions or comments or like feedback? You could also let us know what you found interesting. Yeah. Yeah, in case any questions come to your mind later, it's already past time, so we can wrap it up. But if anybody has any questions or any comments later, you feel free to email us or DM us on our social media channels. And by that I mean Dakshin's social media channels, and we will get back to you. Yeah. Okay. Any last comments from you guys? Shyama, Vineetha, Alphonsa, anything you would want to say as a wrap up?
I think we've spoken too much beyond what we. But yeah, to conclude, to say that, I think it's important for us to understand that we keep saying democratize, but who's part of this democracy? It's us people. So as people, can you go to your nearest municipality, corporation, or Gram Sabha or Panchayat and see, is there a people's biodiversity register, and is there an information that, try it out. The second thing is, around you there is local biology, there's local birds and insects. I mean, I've recently now started getting into understanding what that insect is called. There's a Google lens that helps you now identify anything. So I do that to now understand what is it that I'm consuming and what is it that I'm planting around me, to see if there are no exotics or invasives and things like that. So I think that awareness and conscious recognition of what's around you, I think that would be a good enough thing to start with.
Thank you, Shyama. Thank you, Vineetha. Thank you, Alphonsa. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. And